Hi, my name is Claire Sims and I'm the Admissions and Access Officer at Worcester College in Oxford. That means I have a bit of a split role. I spend half of my year talking to young people about what it's like to study at Oxford by going into schools, hosting outreach events and answering queries. The other half of the year I'm involved in the administrative side of the admissions process here in Oxford, so I get a bit of an insight into what the admissions process looks like and how competitive candidates set themselves apart when they're applying to top universities. Today I'm going to be talking about the Oxford application process, and I'm going to be using some of that insider knowledge to explain what top universities are really looking for. If you haven't already seen my introduction to Oxford, this is a standalone video, so all the concepts should be self-explanatory, but I'd recommend going back and having a watch if you'll find you're unsure about any of the aspects about studying at Oxford. All the information you need about the university is covered in the new prospectus, which is now widely available online. If you visit the publications page under undergraduate admissions on the university website, you'll find digital copies of the brand new prospectus, interviews guide, and families guide. Additionally, if you have any questions about Oxford or the admissions process which I haven't been able to answer, you're more than welcome to get in touch with me directly at admissions@walk.ox.ac.uk. You'll see my email address on the bottom of the slides here. Before you make an application to Oxford, think carefully about whether it's the right university for you. One of the two big questions you'll have to answer when you pick any university is whether it offers a course you would enjoy and whether the teaching style would suit you. We offer around 250 courses covering a wide span of the humanities and sciences, but unfortunately we can't offer everything, and you might find that you're better suited to a different degree at another university. If you'd like to study at Oxford but you know we don't offer the right undergraduate course for you, you might consider studying here as a postgraduate instead, which could give you the opportunity to specialise in some niche areas of study which aren't open to our undergraduates. Oxford has a pretty unique teaching style. The tutorial system is a very individualised form of learning, and you need to show proactive engagement with your subject and independent thinking to really make the most of it. If sitting across from an academic and discussing your work in a lot of detail sounds like your worst nightmare, the tutorial system might not be the right fit for you, and you might want to consider courses at other universities which focus more on group teaching. This is not to say, though, that if you're a shy person you can't possibly thrive in a tutorial. Teaching at Oxford is meant to be challenging and rigorous, but it's also designed to help you develop great communication skills very quickly. So if the idea of a tutorial is exciting but a bit daunting at this point, you're not alone. Many successful applicants have been in the same boat and have picked up those tutorial skills as they went along. It's worth mentioning as well that while tutorials are the cornerstone of the teaching system at Oxford, we also use lectures, classes, seminars, lab work and field trips to make up a broad and varied portfolio of teaching methods. Now, if your answer to those two questions is yes, Oxford does offer your course and you would enjoy the teaching style, you can start to think about whether you would meet the right requirements to make a successful application. You need to have met or be predicted to meet the right grades for your course. Check out the prospectus if you're not sure what those grades would be. And you need to be ready for the academic challenge. Now, this sounds like quite a cheesy note to end on, but it does sum up the kind of attitude you need to make a successful application. Studying at Oxford is a challenge, but if you are passionate about your chosen subject and prepared to work hard to engage with it in a lot of detail over the next 3 or 4 years, you're exactly the kind of candidate that we're looking for. This is what the application process looks like for a candidate who's applying to Oxford or Cambridge. The first 3 steps here are parts you can get started on now, and in a lot of ways they're some of the most important steps in this process. You absolutely can't make a successful application without thinking about these 3 things. As I'll say time and time again, picking your course is the most important decision you'll have to make when you're thinking about your future university. Start thinking early about your main academic interests and which courses you will be eligible for with your current qualifications. And if you're not sure, take a look at our Oxford Explained video for a bit more guidance on what you should consider. Picking a college is the second step here, but this is far less important. Around a third of all successful applicants are admitted to a college which they didn't specify in their application, and yet almost everybody ends up loving their college. If you know you want to have certain facilities at university, like a multi-faith prayer room or a college pet or an on-site gym, you might want to specify a preference for a college which has those facilities. If you have no preference, that's absolutely fine. You can submit an open application, as a quarter of our applicants do, and your application will be sorted to any one of the colleges which offers your subject. College preference has no bearing on the admissions system, so specifying a preference for your college is more about choosing where you want to live and socialise as a student than it is about making an academic choice. Finally, check whether you need to register for any additional tests or prepare any written work to accompany your application. We interview for all of our courses, but we only use admissions tests and written work for some, so make sure to take a look at the prospectus and find out whether you'll need to submit any extra material at the earliest opportunity. The UCAS deadline currently falls on the 15th of October every year. We use a slightly earlier deadline than most universities, so if you're thinking about applying to Oxford or Cambridge, make sure to let your teachers know in advance so you have time to complete your application. We can't accept late applications, so it's really important to remember and stick to this deadline. This is also the registration deadline for most admissions tests in Oxford, which is why it's so important to check in advance whether you'll need to sit a test for your course. Every year we get queries after the deadline from candidates who have submitted their application but didn't realise they had to register for a test as well, and it's really sad because there's very little we can do to help once the deadline has passed, and it's very hard to make a competitive application without completing all the steps in the process. If you're applying to Cambridge, you might have to fill in an additional survey after you've submitted your UCAS application. It's called the Supplementary Application Questionnaire, and it covers some extra details which you can't include in your UCAS form, such as the modules you're currently taking in school and your specific interest in your subject area. This is just for Cambridge candidates. After the application deadline, it's usually time to sit your admissions test and/or submit your written work if needed. This can vary course by course, so do check in the prospectus to see whether you need to complete it. At this stage, admitting tutors look at all the evidence available to them and make their shortlisting decisions. Shortlisted candidates are invited to interview. For UK-based candidates, this will usually mean visiting Oxford for a few days in December, which we'll cover in a bit more detail later. Not all candidates are invited to interview. Usually we interview around 3 to 5 candidates per place, so unfortunately we're not able to shortlist everyone. All the figures for the number of candidates who get interviewed by each course and the number of candidates who are ultimately successful are listed in your university prospectus. Once your interviews are finished and you've returned home, you'll receive your decision from the university in early January. I often get asked which part of the application process is the most important. In which part do you really need to excel to make sure you get an offer? In reality, Oxford takes a holistic approach to admissions, which means that we look at everything in your application as a whole. We take your prior academic achievement, your predicted grades, personal statement and teacher's reference from your UCAS form. We look at your admissions test and your written work if they're required for your course. And if you're shortlisted, we take your performance at interview into account. No single step here is the make or break part of the admissions process. Decisions are made on the basis of your whole application. Let's have a look at each of these steps. When we talk about the importance of prior academic achievement, we don't mean that you have to have achieved absolutely perfect grades throughout your entire school career. You do need to meet or be predicted to meet the entrance requirements for your course. However, when we're looking at the grades you've already achieved, it's equally or even more important to show academic potential. Prior qualifications like your GCSEs make up a relatively small part of our assessment process, and we focus more on your current performance and your potential performance over the next 3 or 4 years as you undertake a degree. If you didn't perform as well as you'd hoped at GCSE, but you really hit your stride at A-level, that doesn't necessarily mean you'd make a weak application. We look at every grade in context and we focus on your academic potential. Here's a quick look at the entrance requirements for our courses. For most of our courses right now, you need to achieve 3 A's at A-level or equivalent. For some of our courses, you'll need A-star AA, and for 5 of our courses, you'll need A-star A-star A. What you'll notice here is that some of these courses are highlighted in blue, meaning you need to have taken a certain A-level in order to be eligible for them, an A-level in English to study English, for example. There are quite a few courses with no specific A-level requirements though. If you're looking at achieving 3 A's at A-level or equivalent, but you don't know which university course you want to study yet, take a look at courses like Classics, Human Sciences, Geography, or Theology and Religion to see if they might interest you. Most of the subjects in blue are our science subjects. Usually for these degrees you need to be taking at least one science subject at A-level, sometimes maths or a relevant science for your subject like A-level chemistry for our chemists. This is all taken from the university prospectus, so if you want to find out exactly what you need to take any of these courses, check them out online or in the physical prospectus. Again, this is just a quick look at the courses which usually require admissions tests. All of the up-to-date information is online, so rather than pausing this slide and searching frantically for the subjects you're interested in, I'd recommend just spending some time on the website and familiarising yourself with the entrance requirements for any of the courses you're considering. Most of our admissions tests are specifically designed to test the skills you'll need for your particular subject. For example, in the GAT for geography, you're asked to show the kind of critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills you'd need to successfully study geography by looking at a written passage and analysing some data. In the CAT, the admissions test for classics courses, you might be given the rules of a made-up language and asked to translate a passage from this language into English to test your interpretation and translation skills. There are a couple of tests which aren't particularly subject-specific, for example the TSA, which candidates need to take for a wide variety of courses. It consists of some multiple-choice questions to assess your general problem-solving, reasoning and comprehension skills, as well as a writing task to assess your ability to organise and express your ideas in writing. We are one of the few universities to take admissions tests into account for a lot of our courses, and people often wonder why we continue to use them. Well, we have 3 main reasons. Firstly, we receive lots of applications every year from candidates who have quite similar academic profiles. They're all predicted the right grades, they've all been supported by fantastic references from their teachers, and they're all evidently passionate about their subject from their personal statements. Using an admissions test gives the admitting tutors another piece of information which they can use to differentiate between candidates, and it allows them to assess how intuitively and adeptly each candidate responds to unseen material about their chosen course. Secondly, our admissions tests are designed to stretch and challenge. Admissions tests can seem really intimidating when you first look at them because you can't prepare your material in advance as you would for a normal exam. They're not impossible though, and we'll come on to how you can prepare for them in a moment, but they are definitely meant to challenge you to think beyond your current studies. For some admissions tests, like the MAT for maths, that means building on your A-level syllabus and applying your existing knowledge to new and unusual problems. For tests which are designed to assess more general skills, like the TSA, this means drawing on your wider critical thinking and problem-solving abilities. Finally, our admissions tests are designed to show your aptitude for your subject and not just your pre-existing knowledge. Tests help us to level the playing field between candidates because no matter what your educational background is, no candidate has previously seen the material. You can occasionally find some pretty obscure sources to analyse in the HAT test for history, for example, because examiners want to see how everybody responds to material which they are unlikely to have come across before. A couple of the tests, like the PAT for physics, engineering and materials, will make use of skills you've already learned at A-level or equivalent. However, the nature of the questions means you need to think laterally about what you already know and apply your skills beyond the syllabus. It's a widely circulated myth that you absolutely can't prepare for an Oxford admissions test. In fact, there are some things you can start doing now which will put you in really good stead when it comes to sitting your admissions test in the autumn. Try to familiarise yourself with the format, question types and timings of the test or tests that you have to sit. The more familiar you are with the format of your test, the more comfortable you will be on the day of the exam itself. If you look on the university website, you'll find sample or past papers for all of our admissions tests, and you should start looking at these well in advance. The most obvious thing to do is to make sure you register for your test in good time. If the admissions process for your subject requires an admissions test, it's really important to sit that test, and unfortunately we cannot accept late registrations. So here's one final big list of all the subjects which will ask you to submit at least one piece of written work as part of your application. All the guidance you need for written work is covered on each course page on the university website, and you can often find some helpful tips on the website for each subjects department as well, so we won't go into too much detail here. Written work requirements can often be tricky, so just like with your admissions test, I'd recommend checking out the specific requirements for your course well in advance. As an admissions officer, I'm often liaising with candidates about where they should send their written work and which piece would be best to submit, things like that. So here are a few of the top tips I've picked up along the way. Firstly, and most importantly, follow the instructions for submitting your work. All the information you need will be listed clearly on the website and on any instructions which you receive from your college, so make sure to read it carefully and submit it in good time so that we can sort out any issues in advance. If you submit the wrong piece of work or you don't submit the right number of pieces, it's much easier to spot and to sort out if you've submitted it before the written work deadline on the 10th of November. Make sure your work is marked by a teacher. Our admitting tutors use written work not just to see how you express yourself, but they also use it to see how your work is currently being assessed at school. It gives a bit more context to the educational background we can see on your UCAS form. Then again, just because it's marked doesn't mean it needs to get full marks. It doesn't have to be the best piece of work you've ever written or the most brilliant history essay ever written at your school or anything like that. It should just be a piece of work written relatively recently before the deadline in November, which accurately reflects the level at which you're currently working. If your teacher works by a mark scheme and regularly puts comments like A01, A02 in the margins, for example, it's helpful to include a copy of the mark scheme if you can. Finally, it doesn't matter if it's handwritten or typed, so long as it's legible. One of the little known but most helpful tips about the Oxford application process is that if you have any difficulties with your application or you're unsure what to submit, you can get in touch with the college which is considering your application and ask them for guidance. That email address at the bottom of each page comes directly to me, and as an admissions officer, I'm more than happy to help with any queries during admissions about how many pieces our candidates should submit and what format they need to be submitted in. Every college has a similar email address which goes to their admissions officer, so no matter where you apply, there's always somebody at the end of an email address or a phone line to talk to if you're not sure. We're going to move on now to personal statements. In this section, we'll be giving you a quick overview of how to build up your personal statement, a few top tips which we've picked up from reading lots of statements, and some key examples from successful statements which will illustrate some of the key skills we're talking about. Let's start with one of the big questions. What should you put into your personal statement? Well, in terms of structure, universities like Oxford and Cambridge will mostly want to know about your academics. Try to keep your personal statement to a ratio of around 80% academic content and 20% extracurricular. Other universities might think differently, of course, so if you're applying to a wide variety of universities, you might want to fiddle around a bit with this ratio, but in general, top universities will prioritise your studies over anything you've been doing outside of work. Now, there is an important bridge between your academic studies and your extracurriculars, and these are your supercurriculars. If you've never heard this term before, you're about to hear it a lot because it's one of the most important terms we use when we're talking about great personal statements. A supercurricular is something you do outside of your normal schoolwork, which is related to your studies. For example, if you're taking A-level history, you might be reading a book about the Tudors in your spare time. If you're taking A-level chemistry, you might read the New Scientist magazine on a regular basis. Supercurriculars include things which are related to your academic studies, but they're not academic in the sense that you're being assessed on them by a teacher. You'd usually pursue them in your own time, on top of what you're already doing in school. What counts as a supercurricular? Well, pretty much anything that you use to develop your understanding of your subject, such as books, articles, magazines, podcasts, websites, summer schools, documentaries, online lectures, and so on. We'll take a look in a moment at some of the supercurriculars you could use. Supercurriculars don't fall under that 20% limit, even though they're not technically part of your schoolwork. In fact, a well-chosen range of supercurriculars will often make up the backbone of a successful personal statement. Candidates will always write that they're fascinated by their subject or that they can't imagine studying anything else, but to really prove that interest, you need to illustrate it with examples of resources you've engaged with above and beyond your school curriculum, which have helped you to understand your chosen subject on a deeper level. Above all in your personal statement, you should focus on why you want to study your chosen course and why you will be suited to studying it. This is where supercurriculars will really come in handy. Rather than just telling the reader about your interest, you can use key examples of ways in which you've engaged with your subject to show that interest. Admitting tutors will want to see that you meet the subject criteria, so make sure you've looked online and are familiar with what they're looking for. Most courses will ask you to show some of the same key skills like analysis, evaluation, communication, critical thinking, and a proven interest in your subject. It's really important to use your personal statement to show off these skills, and you can do that quickly and clearly with a few pertinent supercurriculars. You only have a limited number of words to work with, so make sure to write succinctly, analytically, and with reference to key examples. You can talk about your current studies. You don't have to go into detail about what you're doing in each of your subjects, but you may find it useful to talk about one or two key topics which you've particularly enjoyed studying at A-level and which have launched your interest in a certain area of your chosen university course. Make sure to always keep it relevant to your chosen course and your aptitude for university study. If you're applying for a fine art degree, admitting tutors might not be particularly interested in the details of your A-level chemistry course, but they might be interested in what this A-level has taught you about communication, time management, and attention to detail. Outside reading is basically another word for your supercurriculars. People often think you have to stuff your personal statement full of books, but that's not necessarily true. You can find supercurriculars in lots of different formats, as we'll see in the next slide. Nonetheless, if you find it helpful to include a few books which have piqued your interest in your subject, particularly if you're applying for a course where you need to analyse text on a regular basis, such as theology or French, it's good to be selective with what you pick. It's not necessary to include every book you've ever read, just keep it relevant to your interests and focus on properly analysing and linking the text you reference rather than just listing everything. There should be a clear structure to your personal statement. For example, an applicant for Earth Sciences might start a paragraph by talking about their favourite module in A-level physics, explain what they found particularly interesting in this module, show how they followed up on that interest by reading a book by a leading geologist about that topic, and then compare what they found good or bad or interesting in that book to a series of science podcasts they've also listened to on a similar topic. In the extracurricular portion of your personal statement, you'll want to put anything which you've done outside of your studies which isn't related to your academics. That could include work experience if it isn't directly relevant to your course, your future career plans, any clubs and societies you take part in at school, and anything you do in your free time. If you have work experience which is related to your course, for example if you've shadowed a researcher in a lab for a week and you're applying for material sciences, you could include this in the academic part of your personal statement and explain how it influenced your understanding of your subject. If you've completed unrelated work experience, you could link it to the skills which you'll need to be a successful student, such as time management or critical thinking. You can talk about your future career, but there are a few subjects where your future career choice is actually important to your study of the subject, so it's okay not to go into details about your career at this point. When writing about your extracurriculars, make sure to focus on your transferable skills. Being a star footballer won't necessarily have taught you a lot about being a great biologist, but it will probably have taught you something about working closely with others in a team and communicating clear instructions to your teammates, which could be really helpful in a university lab. Tutoring younger students in your spare time isn't particularly relevant to law, but it has probably taught you how to explain complex ideas in simple terms, which is a really useful skill for a lawyer. Make sure every example pulls the focus back to your chosen subject and why you'd be a great candidate to study your subject at university level. Here are just a few ideas of the supercurriculars you could pursue over the next few months as you build up your university application. You can pause and take a look at these in closer detail, or you might already have your own ideas about where you can look for relevant resources. There are thousands of options online, in school, and in your local area for expanding your knowledge about your subject. If you're not sure where to start, I'd recommend visiting a website called Staircase 12. It's run by University College in Oxford, and it features huge lists of supercurricular resources and recommended reading which you can use to narrow down by subject. Before we move on, there are a couple of resources here which are particularly worth taking note of. Firstly, although it sounds very dry, you may be surprised by the number of interesting programmes you can find on BBC Radio 4. You can access a huge back catalogue of radio programmes online on a wide variety of different topics, from in-depth discussions about subjects you're already covering in school to cutting-edge research on totally new topics. In particular, you might be interested by discussion shows like In Our Time, not least because the format of these programs is usually a few academics sitting around a table talking about their research. It can be hugely useful to listen to academics talk and how they make their arguments when you're writing your personal statement and preparing for an academic interview. Podcasts are a really unsung format for supercurriculars for the same reason. You can listen to how academics talk about their work in a lot of detail, and they can cover some really interesting and obscure material. Plus, they're short and easily digestible. If you don't have a lot of time to focus on reading all the books in your local library, you could listen to a 15-minute podcast on your way to school every day and develop an equally interesting and varied bank of supercurriculars for your personal statement. Lastly, we have a few magazines here. Those with interests in the humanities might be familiar with The Economist, The New Statesman, History Today, or The Week, whereas scientists might know The New Scientist, Discover, or National Geographic. Magazines are short, current, and in touch with the wider academic community around your subject. By keeping up to date with developments in your field, you can include recent examples in your personal statement and impress your reader with your level of engagement. Plus, magazines provide the perfect opportunity to discuss your topic with other people, which can be really helpful practice for expressing yourself in an academic interview. Try taking a short article you enjoyed out of a magazine and ask a friend or relative to read it so you can talk about it with them. So what can you do to make the most of all these supercurriculars? Well, my main piece of advice is to keep a journal of everything you've engaged with which is related to your future course of study. Keep track of all the books, articles, podcasts, news items, lectures, or really anything which has given you a new perspective on your subject. Try to be critical with the content you work with too. Rather than just noting down which book you read, write down some of the key arguments from the book, some of the things you liked and some of the things you disagreed with. This will help you put together the building blocks for your personal statement, so when the time comes to write it all down, you already have a journal full of materials you've engaged with, the key topics they covered, and how they influenced or didn't influence your understanding of your subject. As well as thinking about these resources and writing down your response to them, try to engage with other people and discuss the material with them too. You might think about starting a book club or a discussion club in your school, or discussing an article with family and friends like we mentioned on the previous slide. If you're not sure where to look, ask your teachers for recommendations of what to engage with. Keep up with the news. You might find an interesting article on the news one day which leads you down a totally new path of discovery in your subject. Keep an eye out for new forms of media as well. Not everything in your personal statement has to be a lengthy academic book, and you might find that a brand new podcast or an exhibition in the local town hall is as influential on your subject interest as the nearest textbook. Now, if you've built up a journal of supercurriculars and you're wondering how to turn it into a great personal statement, here's a quick trick to get you started. Try writing down every way in which you've engaged with your subject so far. This includes all the books, articles, podcasts, exhibitions, summer schools, videos, documentaries, lectures, radio shows, seminars, discussions, and academic activities you can think of which are related to the subject you want to study at university. If you're not sure which subject you'd like to do yet, you could pick a couple of options and try to write a list for both. It might even help you make up your mind. Once you've got your list, try to choose your most significant engagement with your subject. Which activity did you enjoy the most? Which one gave you the most new ideas about your subject? Which one really sparked your interest? You don't have to pick just one, but try to narrow it down as much as you can. Now think about why this is your most significant engagement. What did you learn from it? What did it teach you about a certain area of your subject? Did it change the way you think about your subject entirely? Think critically about your supercurriculars. These are the first few blocks of your personal statement. Pick a few of the items on your list, write down the way they impacted your understanding of your subject, and see if you can find any links or contrasts between them. If your list is looking a bit empty and you don't think you have enough to write about, now is the perfect time to go back, take a look at that list of supercurriculars, and pick something to investigate. Start building up your supercurricular toolkit now so that when it comes to sitting down and writing your personal statement, you have enough material right there at your fingertips. Now, if your list goes on for pages and pages, just remember that you don't have to include everything you've ever engaged with. Writing a great personal statement is about being selective with your resources and focusing on the supercurriculars which have really influenced you. So here are our top 10 tips for writing a great personal statement. Number 1, plan in advance and give yourself plenty of time to come up with something that you're happy with. Now is the perfect time to start working on your personal statement. You don't want to leave it until the last minute and end up submitting something which doesn't reflect you to the best of your ability. Number 2, this is an obvious one, but make sure your spelling, punctuation and grammar are correct. Check really carefully for any errors or typos before hitting the submit button. Accidents do happen, but it's always a good sign when a candidate has taken the time and effort to make sure their personal statement is well written throughout. Number 3, don't lie. I'm sure most candidates never would, but every year we do see a number of personal statements from candidates who have shoehorned a book in, which they think will look really impressive, but which they actually haven't read at all. You have a limited amount of space in your personal statement to express your interest in your subject, so try to focus on the books, articles and podcasts which you actually have looked at and enjoyed. Plus, at Oxford, we interview for every course, and your personal statement is one of the things you could easily get asked about at interview. When an interviewer asks you about a book you haven't read, it quickly becomes obvious that you haven't read it, and you're stuck in an awkward conversation for the next 10 minutes trying to navigate a discussion which clearly isn't going to go anywhere. It's more fruitful to give tutors the opportunity to ask you about something you actually want to talk about by putting it into your personal statement. Not all interviewers will ask you about your personal statement, but it can still be helpful to think of all the topics you put in as signposts for your future interviewer to show them what you're really interested in and would love to talk about in more detail. Number 4, avoid cliches and overused phrases. Everybody says that they're passionate about their subject in their personal statement, and it may well be true, but don't just tell us that. We're more interested in what you've done to pursue that passion. What topic in particular has interested you? Which podcast really sparked your interest in the subject? And what did you read or listen to next which really developed that interest? It's almost impossible to avoid every cliche in the book when you're writing a personal statement, but do try to make it personal to you. Think carefully and creatively about what it is within your future course which has really hooked your interest. When you're thinking about all the significant encounters you've had with your subject to include in your personal statement, you might be tempted to start with the earliest one, your first trip to the museum as a 4-year-old, for example, or a disastrous encounter with a chemistry set on your 8th birthday. However, it's usually more effective to focus on your most recent experiences. Where you might have discovered your interest in Latin literature as a toddler, we're more interested in how you have pursued and cultivated this interest in preparation for university, and we'd hope that your perspective on your subject has developed and changed slightly since you were a toddler. Along the same lines, try to avoid lengthy quotes, extensive anecdotes, or anything really edgy like writing your personal statement as a poem or a letter. It might sound really original when you're writing it, but it's unlikely to strike the right tone with the universities you're applying to, and it quickly stops being funny once you hit the submit button. Number 5, maintain a clear and professional tone. You don't have to write like Dickens or Shakespeare to really impress the admitting tutors with your personal statement. It's always better to stick to plain language and write like yourself, rather than trying to come up with something really original or using all the long words in the dictionary. When we look at some examples later, you'll see how successful candidates have used plain language to get their point across really simply but effectively in their personal statements. Number 6, just as using a professional tone is best, don't worry about throwing every word you know at your personal statement. It's personal for a reason. It should express your interest in your subject in your own terms. Try to avoid making it so convoluted or wordy that it's difficult to read. Number 7, avoid listing everything you've ever done. When you're starting to think about your personal statement, it's perfectly reasonable and usually a really good idea to keep a list of everything you've done to engage with your subject. However, when it comes to writing it down, you need to be selective with your sources. You don't need to prove to the reader that you've read every single book on a certain topic. Instead, put a couple of your favourite books in the spotlight and use them skillfully to illustrate your wider interest in the subject. Number 8, everything should have a clear, logical reason for being there. You might be an English applicant who would like to include their prize-winning maths project in their personal statement. That's great, but unless that maths project taught you something significant about the skills you need to be a great university student, it probably doesn't deserve a place within the limited characters of your statement. As we mentioned earlier, there is some space to talk about your extracurriculars and your achievements outside of your subject, but that would ideally make up a small part of your statement, and it's best to link it to university study skills if possible. Number 9, don't worry about including examples from different unis. By this I mean that if you attended a summer school about your subject at the University of Leeds, and then you decide you want to apply to Cambridge, don't worry about potentially insulting Cambridge by mentioning another university in your statement. Universities understand that there are loads of opportunities to engage with your subject at other universities up and down the country, and they won't hold it against you if you've gone to a lecture series somewhere else before applying to them. They'll be more interested in what you did there and how it influenced your understanding of your subject. Number 10, my final tip is to proofread your personal statement in a variety of contexts. Read it to yourself, read it from the bottom to the top, read it out loud, try to read it in different ways so you can hear what it might sound like to somebody else. Do ask your teachers for their advice, but remember that you don't have to share your personal statement with everybody you know. In fact, it can be unhelpful to ask for 20 people's opinions on your statement because you will get a lot of conflicting advice, and you might end up trying to please everybody and writing something which doesn't actually sound like you at all. Perhaps the best person to read your personal statement is somebody you know but with whom you haven't exactly discussed university yet, like an aunt or a teacher who doesn't regularly teach you. They won't already be familiar with why you want to study your particular subject at university, so they'll be able to tell you how your interest comes across to a new reader. We're going to take a look now at 5 excerpts from personal statements written by successful candidates. We'll start off by looking at one introductory paragraph, move on to 3 middle paragraphs from different subjects, and finish with a typical closing paragraph. You'll notice in each of these examples that everybody takes their own approach and that there is no single perfect method for writing your personal statement. I hope they'll simply illustrate some of the key skills we were talking about earlier and give you a sense of how you might structure your personal statement with a strong opening paragraph, some solid content in the middle, and a cohesive conclusion. So this is what this personal statement starts off with for law. Handling stolen goods, the charge of the first case to strike my interest in the law. This case was the topic of the magistrate's mock law trial when I was 13, and from then my motivation to study law has only grown. From that moment, I have discovered that my curiosity into the legislation that carefully governs our country can be paired so perfectly with my love for expressing my own opinion, public speaking, and formulating and defending my own arguments. I have participated in the Citizenship Foundation's mock trial every year for the last 5 years. Each year when we start a new criminal case, I am captivated by the intricacies of the applicable laws, and I'm very excited at the prospect of studying academic law at university. So what makes this a great opening paragraph? First of all, this candidate leaps straight into the content. They don't waste valuable word space in setting up a really lengthy introduction, but instead they take a focused and supercurricular-based approach to their subject from the very first sentence. This person doesn't just say that they're curious about legislation or great at public speaking, but they ground those statements in fact. By referring back to their hands-on experience of the mock trial, this candidate proves that they are not only serious about their interest in the law, but they've proactively sought to engage with it outside of school. We've got 3 excerpts from the middle sections of personal statements, and this first one comes from a medicine applicant. I find the mechanisms and pathways of the body fascinating. For example, the process by which a blood clot is formed is both complex and effective. I spent a week in the labs at the Royal Marsden Hospital and enjoyed applying the knowledge I gained in AS biology and chemistry to understand the tests performed, such as that for urea and electrolytes. I also learned the significance and implications of these tests for the patient, their disease, and its treatment. I found it rewarding to see the real-world applications of my studies, such as the use of monoclonal antibodies. I also learned about stem cell treatment, the complications involved in caring for immunosuppressed patients, and the importance of informed consent during the donation process. This is a great illustration of our point earlier about narrowing down your interests in your subject. Rather than just saying you find medicine fascinating, try to specify which topics you have found particularly interesting and why. You don't need to explain everything about these topics. This person has made references to certain tests and treatments, but they haven't used up valuable words to explain those tests in detail, which is an important technique to remember when you only have a limited number of words to play with. Remember that the person reading your personal statement will also be an expert in their field, so while you might choose to focus on a couple of your favourite topics, you can simply signpost a lot of your interests without going into extensive detail about them. It's the analysis, it's the personal part of your personal statement, which is more important. This candidate's next paragraph goes on to talk about medical ethics, so this sentence at the end here about informed consent is an important link in the narrative chain of their statement. It's worth noting though that you don't need work experience to write a great personal statement. If you've got some work experience in your field, that's fantastic, and you can use it to illustrate your interest in your subject, as this candidate has, but we know that relevant work experience can be hard to find, especially in the medical field when you're under 18. Work experience is essentially another bullet point on your list of supercurriculars. If you don't have it, there should be plenty of other bullet points on that list which you can use. Even if you do have work experience, it might not be the most relevant engagement with your subject. You might have gained more from a history book than from a week working in your local museum as a prospective history applicant, for example. Think carefully about which experiences and examples you want to prioritise to make the most of the space you have. Here's another example of a middle paragraph, this time from an English student. I have recently enjoyed drawing parallels between Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors and his contemporary Jonson's The Alchemist, such as their adherence to the Aristotelian unities. I gained an understanding of the comedic context of Twelfth Night's production, which was useful to my A-level studies. Being fortunate enough to live close to Haworth, I visited the Bronte Parsonage Museum to conduct research for a feminist reading of The Tenant of Wilderfell Hall. Through my blog, I share my thoughts on a wide range of literature in a less formal way, whilst honing the close analytical skills that I have acquired from studying English. Now, for an English personal statement, you do probably need to include some literature, and this person mentions books they've enjoyed reading throughout their statement. What's important here is that they haven't just written a long list of all the books they've read, but they've showed their analysis skills to the reader by comparing a couple of key texts, for example Shakespeare and Johnson at the start, and showing how they engage with what they read on a deeper level by talking about their visit to a local literary site and their blog. This is an important lesson. Your personal statement should show focus and structure, so while writing a long shopping list of supercurriculars is a great place to start, be selective and streamline the materials you choose to include in the finished piece. Their choice of supercurriculars is also really interesting. They've mentioned that they live near the Bronte Parsonage Museum and that they keep a blog of books they've read. This person has used the materials available to them. They're lucky enough to have some local resources to write about, which is great, but they've also used their blog effectively to illustrate their engagement with their subject. They also haven't just thrown these examples in, but they've explained why these activities have helped to develop their subject interest. Here's our last example of a middle paragraph, and it comes from a maths and philosophy statement. Maths and philosophy offer the ability to reduce a problem to its constituent parts in a way that no other field can, enabling us to establish arguments which may be brought to bear upon a multitude of issues in order to change the world for the better. Last year I took part in STEM in the Pipeline, a maths challenge for teams of students studying advanced higher mathematics. I applied my knowledge of mathematics to model real situations, and also gave consideration to moral issues, evaluating the merit of ethical arguments regarding matters such as safety and the environment, earning a Silver Crest Award in the process. One of the reasons maths is so appealing is that it is truly universal. No matter where on earth we find ourselves, the same mathematical principles, derived from a simple set of axioms, hold true. Philosophy, meanwhile, has captured my attention unlike any other subject, because it challenges me to evaluate the validity of my own beliefs. If you're applying to study 2 or even 3 subjects together in a joint honours degree, this is a good example of talking about the links and differences between those different subjects. At Oxford, you can't pick and choose any subjects to study together. We only offer a limited number of joint courses, and the subjects in those joint courses have to have some links to each other. For example, there are interdisciplinary benefits to studying philosophy, politics, and economics together. So when you're writing a personal statement for a course which involves 2 or 3 subjects in joint schools, it's important to show not just why you're interested in each of those subjects, but why you're interested in studying them together. What you might notice about this paragraph is it's quite long, and it doesn't use quite as many examples as the other ones we've looked at. We only have STEM in the pipeline here. This candidate does go on to discuss a book about Plato at the end of this paragraph, so they do show a range of supercurriculars later on in their statement. However, this illustrates that even one example, if it's been a significant engagement with your subject, can do a lot of work for you and give some grounding to the big judgments you make. This person has spoken about why they're interested in maths, why they're interested in philosophy, and why they're interested in studying both subjects together, and they've used a pertinent example to tie all those statements together and prove that they're not just saying they're interested, they've put the work in to prove it too. Our final example is the closing paragraph from the statement of PPE. My role as head boy has enabled me to hone skills in public address, organisation and managing events. I lead student parliament promoting debate about important school issues. Other activities include peer mentoring and performing the lead in the school musical. I keep fit, am a strong swimmer and a qualified lifeguard. My particular interest is in public speaking. I spoke in response to the prompt, "Can terrorism be justified?" as part of an ESU competition, an opportunity to incorporate the notions of PPE within a measured speech. I eagerly anticipate the academic rigour of a demanding PPE degree, as well as playing an active role in university life. This person hasn't mentioned their extracurricular activities until their closing paragraph, so they've spent the bulk of their statement talking about their subject and why they're keen to study the course, and they've saved up anything which is less relevant but which they'd still like to mention until the end. They do have quite a lot going on. They're head boy, they lead student parliament, they talk about peer mentoring, the school musical, sports and public speaking. You don't need to have all these extracurriculars, as we've already mentioned. Oxford and Cambridge will focus more on the academic and supercurricular parts. However, this person has done a good job of mentioning all these activities, whilst also making sure it's mostly still relevant to and focused on their subject. Their role as head boy has given them skills they might need to be an effective student. Their interest in public speaking has taught them something about their chosen subject. As we've mentioned, other universities may give more attention to your extracurriculars, and you may well want to include these activities because you're proud of them. But do remember that your personal statement is primarily there to serve an academic purpose, so it's helpful to link your outside activities to the skills you'd need to be a great university student. In the final part of this presentation, we're going to talk about interviews. Out of all the steps in the Oxford admissions process, the interview system is probably the part which causes the most confusion for candidates. There are certainly plenty of rumours, myths and scaremongering headlines out there which could easily convince an applicant that Oxford uses interviews to terrify and interrogate its applicants. This isn't true, of course, and I hope this section will help to clear up that confusion by explaining what happens in an interview, why we use interviews, and how you can prepare for one in advance. In particular, I hope this section will give you a few ideas about where to go to look for resources after this presentation. I will say at this point that if you want to read more about the university interview process, a great place to start is the university's official interviews guide, which is available on the publications page of the university website. This is a really helpful booklet which is updated every year, so it's full of up-to-date descriptions, testimonials and mock questions. Before we move on, I'd like to draw your attention to this quote here, which comes from the interviews guide. This French tutor says, "We want to see someone thinking for themselves, being willing to tackle a challenging question. It's really important for candidates to understand that tackling doesn't necessarily mean solving. It will be about applying skills that you already have to a new scenario, text, or problem." One thing to remember as you move through this section is that interviews are about tackling, not solving. It's perfectly normal to feel intimidated when you see some of these questions, but you don't have to have all the answers up your sleeve to make a really good impression at interview. The Oxford interview process can be tricky to get the hang of at times, so here's a quick overview of what it actually involves. Interviews take place in Oxford each winter, and candidates are usually invited to stay at the college they applied to or have been allocated to for the duration of their interviews. Your accommodation and meals are provided by your college for free during this period, so you don't have to worry about making arrangements to stay in the city at short notice. The length of your stay will depend on your subject. For some subjects, you might have a couple of interviews in the space of a day and then you're free to go home, so you might not even need to stay overnight. For other subjects, you might be required to stay in the city for 4 or 5 days. For most subjects, candidates are asked to spend 2 to 3 days in the city. If you want to know exactly how long you'd be asked to stay in the city for your subject, check out the interview timetable on the university website. Candidates are usually asked to attend 1 or 2 interviews, possibly more, whilst they're in the city. Again, the number and type of interviews you have varies by subject. For most subjects, you'll find out when your interviews will take place when you arrive at your college. You'll have at least one pre-scheduled interview, and then for some subjects, you might get called for some extra interviews which are arranged whilst the interview process is in motion. Candidates often wonder what these extra interviews mean because they can be scheduled at short notice and they might take place at other colleges. However, they shouldn't cause you a lot of concern as they are a fairly routine part of the Oxford interview process. Extra interviews can be scheduled for a huge number of different reasons, and there's no need to worry if you do get called for an extra interview or you don't. There are plenty of successful candidates on both sides of the scale here. Plus, colleges are staffed with friendly porters, experienced admissions staff, and helpful student ambassadors who you can always talk to if you have any concerns whilst you're here. Each interview usually lasts for around 20 to 30 minutes and will be conducted by 2 academic tutors. An interview is comparable to a tutorial. It's an academic discussion which is designed to stretch and challenge like the rest of the admissions process, but which is also guided and structured by the interviewer. Your interviewers are human and they want to help you perform to the best of your potential, so it's okay to talk out loud about your ideas, start with what you know, and work with them as you think through your answers. As we said earlier, you don't have to have all the solutions to these challenging questions from the word go. You might be asked to prepare in advance for an interview. For example, before you go into a geography interview, you might be given 20 minutes to look at a graph and make notes about the patterns you can see. Before you go into your maths interview, you might be given a sheet of problems to think about. Not all subjects and colleges will ask you to prepare in advance, so it's always worth checking your interview timetable really closely when you arrive for your interviews to see whether any preparation is needed. Giving each candidate in a certain cohort unseen material is one of the ways our tutors can assess how candidates tackle problems, rather than necessarily solving them. You may well be asked to look at your subject from a new angle, or use new materials which you haven't seen before. This puts candidates on a level playing field, and helps the tutors to see how you think and whether you can show the skills you need for the successful study of your subject when you're faced with new problems. It's difficult to predict exactly what you might be asked. Your personal statement, any written work you've submitted, and your current A-level studies could come up, but it's likely that you may also be asked to apply your existing skills to something totally new. When you're thinking about whether applying to Oxford or Cambridge is right for you, and particularly when you're wondering how to prepare for any potential interviews, it can be helpful to watch a mock interview. There are plenty of resources for this online. One I would recommend is this video, produced by the University of Cambridge, which invites some successful applicants back during their first year of studying at Cambridge to recreate their interview experience. The interview process is quite similar at both Oxford and Cambridge, so most resources are applicable to both universities. One word of warning though, make sure to watch interview resources which have been provided by the universities and colleges themselves. There are plenty of first-hand accounts out there in which people will just try to scare others or try to put them off by bragging. So when it comes to getting an accurate picture of what interviews are really like, it's best to stick to what's officially been provided by the university. Now that we've seen what an interview might look like, what can we do to prepare for one? Well, one of the easiest ways to prepare is just to look at some challenging questions and think about how you might start to answer them. We've got 4 mock interview questions here, starting with this question from Law. What does it mean for someone to take another's car? I'm not going to talk about these in a lot of detail, so if you'd like to work through this question, pause now and take a moment to think about your response. One thing to emphasise about all of these questions is that you don't have to know the answer. You do, however, have to think about the question carefully and look closely at exactly what is being asked of you. For example, you could start by breaking down the terms of the question. Clearly the word take is crucial here. Why do you think this term is so important? Is it ambiguous? When you're, say, you're going to take somebody's car, could that have multiple different meanings? What further information or evidence would you need to answer this question fully? You don't have to be familiar with any legal precedents to answer this question. You don't have to be familiar with every case of car theft in the past decade. All you need are your analytical skills and the ability to talk through your thinking. If it's helpful, you could even jot through some of your ideas in response to this question, even though you might not be able to do that in a real interview. It's okay to change your mind in an interview after thinking through your answer or looking at some new evidence. So it could help at this stage to make a note of all the different answers you could give and evaluate which one makes the most sense to you. You might also want to discuss these questions with somebody else. As we've already mentioned, often the best way to prepare for an interview is to practice talking about your subject out loud and vocalising your thoughts, even if you're only talking to a pet or a houseplant. You could write this question down and start a discussion about it later. You could discuss it with somebody who's interested in applying for the same subject as you, or it could be somebody totally different, like your best friend or your sister. Work together on coming up with ideas and thinking about potential answers you could give to this question. Here's another mock interview question for the humanities, this time for English. What do you think constitutes good literature? Again, we can start off by looking closely at the terms in this question. You might start to think about what good means to you. Is it to do with the way a book is written, or the kind of themes it tackles? Is it to do with the text's wider reception, for example its reviews or its popularity among readers? This is a good opportunity to tell the interviewer a little bit more about your wider reading by bringing in some examples. If you think you've mentioned a great piece of literature in your personal statement, you could use it as an example here and launch a wider discussion about that text. Your interviewer might also encourage you to think critically about the question itself. This question assumes that there is such a thing as good and bad literature. Do you agree? What do you think literature is, and what do you think we gain by dividing it between good and bad? Would a literary critic see this divide differently to a casual reader? We're going to move on to a couple of mock interview questions for the sciences. Firstly, we have a deceptively simple question from psychology. Why do human beings have two eyes? To answer this question, you might start by drawing from what you know. You could bring in examples about evolution from A-level biology, for example, or refer to an article you read in The New Scientist about blindness in certain animals. You could start with the simple things like why we use our eyes and build your way up from there. You don't need to be an expert in human biology to give a convincing answer. You just need to think intuitively about the question, based on the material and evidence you already know, and talk your interviewers through your thought process clearly. There's no single set answer to a question like this, and you're not expected to be up to date with the latest theories in the field. The interviewer wants to assess your critical thinking and reasoning skills, not check your expertise. Our final mock interview question is one for physics. A ball, initially at rest, is pushed upwards by a constant force for a certain amount of time. Sketch the velocity of the ball as a function of time, from the start to when it hits the ground. Physics interview questions often start with a question like this, which looks as though it could have come straight from the physics aptitude test. In this example, the interviewer would give you some materials to sketch a graph and would then help you to get through the problem. If you make a mistake, that's fine. Students do make mistakes and aren't expected to know all the material, especially as the interview progresses. An interview is usually a guided discussion rather than a matter of getting the answers right or wrong straight away. Interviewers will look to see how candidates respond to guidance and how they correct themselves, hopefully less by guessing than by thinking through what they know and what they have been told. If a candidate gets things correct straight away, the interviewer might move on, either to further aspects of the original question or to others. For instance, this question could easily result in a discussion of satellites, orbits, weightlessness, or dark matter. Thinking through questions like this can be a great place to start when you're wondering how to prepare for an academic interview. If you're looking for more questions, try looking on the university website or on Oxplore, which is an outreach resource full of big questions provided by the university. Remember to try articulating your thoughts out loud. Needless to say, talking through your thinking process is different to simply thinking, and it's a skill which you can definitely practice in the run-up to an interview. You can talk to friends, family, classmates, teachers, or even inanimate objects. It's building up the skill of communicating your arguments which really matters. As I've already mentioned, you can check out the university's online interview guides for more guidance. You can watch mock interviews online, although remember to make sure that they come from reputable sources. When you know you've been invited to interview, do take a look over your schoolwork, your personal statement, and your written work before you go. It's unlikely that your interviews will totally focus on these things, but you may well be asked a couple of questions about books you've mentioned in your personal statement, or a topic you're currently enjoying in one of your A-levels, so it's worth being familiar with your material in advance. Finally, remember that even with all this practice, it's impossible to totally prepare for an interview at Oxford or Cambridge. Part of the challenge is grappling with unseen material, and even the best prepared candidates will probably be faced with some questions they couldn't predict. That's why interviews are particularly helpful for leveling the playing field. The best thing you can do is to keep working on your communication skills, keep working hard on your current studies, and put together the best application you can to maximise your chances of being shortlisted. Well, we've come to the end of our overview of the Oxford admissions process, and I hope you found some useful material here. Before we go, I'd just like to point out a few extra resources which you can use if you're looking for some extra support with your application between now and the application deadline. My main piece of advice is to start working on your application as early as possible. This doesn't mean you have to have your full personal statement ready to go years in advance, but it does mean that your application will benefit from a few extra months of planning, reading, and practicing. Start keeping a log of your supercurriculars, start investigating your subject and finding out which parts you're particularly interested in, start discussing key topics with the people around you. In particular, if you're thinking about applying to Oxford or Cambridge, make sure your tutors know in good time so that they can help you to get your application ready and register for the right tests at the start of the new academic year. If you'll be going into Year 13 at UK Non-Selective State School in August 2020, you could apply to attend one of our application preparation days. We run these special one-day conferences at Worcester College for applicants in certain subjects to give them really in-depth guidance on their personal statements, their admissions tests, and their potential interviews. The day is set up to support you through the whole admissions process and make sure that you're prepared to make a competitive application before the deadline in October. Check out all the details on our website and do register to find out more because we are really proud of these events. We think they were really successful last year and we'd love to see you there this time around. There is also a central outreach calendar on the university website, which you can use to find links to events going on up and down the country for prospective applicants. You can find events coming up for all kinds of different things, from study days and online seminars to roadshows and student conferences, so do take a look at the calendar and find out what you would be eligible for. Lastly, you can come to the University Open Days this July and September, or you can simply follow along on social media. If you can't make it down to Oxford, we try to provide as much digital content as we can, so you don't miss out on the Open Day experience, and that will all be collated on the university website. So there you have it. I hope this information has been helpful, and I wish you the very best of luck with your future application. As I mentioned at the start, if there's anything I've spoken about today which you'd like to learn more about, you're more than welcome to get in touch with me at my email address below, admissions@walk.ox.ac.uk. Thank you very much for listening.